Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole. It is Black History Month, but as you know, I celebrate our history. I celebrate the lives and culture and experiences of African Americans all the time. Uh, but it's a special celebration this month. And I'm very excited that, I often have authors coming on today. It's really wonderful to have an author who has devoted so much of her life to researching her own family history, which in fact is part of all of our history. And so we get to dive deep into an incredible book that she has written that really does look deep inside of how America became what it is and the impact of the slave trade on all of our lives. So let me tell you about our author. She is Lisa Sharon Harper, and she's the founder of Freedom Road, a consulting group dedicated to shrinking the narrative gap. She's a sought after speaker, trainer, and consultant. She's written several books, including the book we'll talk about today, Fortune: How Race Broke My Family and the World, and How to Repair It All. She's also written the critically acclaimed The Very Good Gospel. Her work has been featured in The New Yorker, Relevant, Essence, HuffPost, the National Civic Review, and CNN. She's been on PBS's Religion and Ethics News Weekly. She's in the media telling her story, all of the great work that she has done. It really draws her to the public forum. And that's why we are engaging with her today. So I would love to welcome Lisa Sharon Harper to Dreamleapers. I can't hear you. Your sound is off. Let's see. Lisa. I'm not hearing you yet. She's coming. You know how technology. Not yet. Technology is still, you're not there yet. One more time. Let's see.
How about
Yes.
now?
Yes, there
Ah!
she is.
I'm sorry.
That's
I don't know what
okay.
happened.
That's all right.
Okay.
How are you?
I am so good, Harriet. It is so great to be here. It's an honor and a real honor to be in conversation with WBIA listeners. My mom used to listen to your radio station way back in the day. In
Oh,
fact,
wow.
part of in the book, she actually mentions your radio station.
Oh my gosh, that's
She sure
incredible. Yeah,
does. So,
WBAI is now it's the
yeah.
62nd year. And
Oh,
I often say how incredible it is that, so many businesses did not make it through COVID.
oh my gosh.
And because this has been such a challenging time, and we have, and we're here and so
Hmm.
excited to be able to share wonderful stories, including yours. So, this book, Fortune:
Hmm.
How Race Broke My Family and the World, and How to Repair It All. You have done so much research, and Lisa, at this moment, so many people are turning their attention to the history of Black people and Black culture, and as we know,
Mhm.
that's all of our history.
Yes, that's right.
There's so much information in here that's kind of hard to take about the slave trade and the impact that
Mhm.
it had on so many families.
Mhm.
What made you start doing this work, and how did you approach the research?
Yeah, it's funny. I think that there's something happening within the historical, it's just like the society of people who do history, and particular professional historians are beginning to recognize there's a whole new field of historians that are doing the work from the ground up, genealogy as history writing, as history making, because our history has typically been written from the perspective of the academic institutions, from the perspective of governments who are trying to shape narrative and propaganda, and even from the perspective, of course, of news, who writes the first draft of history. But news agencies typically are run by white folk. And so they're drafting that history from their perspective, from their point of view. So the thing that I think that is so special about Fortune and also other books like it is that it's taking another look at history through the lens of the bottom up, of those who have been oppressed from our perspective. And so there's that perspective is privileged in the book. It's centered in the book. And I started it not to write a book. I started it 30 years ago just to figure out, who am I? You know what I mean? How we always go in that search when you're in your 20s. Who
Sure.
am I? You know? So in my 20s, in fact, at 22 years old, I called my mom and I said, "Mom, who am I? You know, who are my ancestors?" And I still have that first family tree. That
Wow.
first family tree, it did not have names on it. It only had, relationships. Grandmom lived this time in this place. Great grandpop lived in this place, and I was most interested in tracing my great grandfather's line on my mother's side, because I had just watched Dances with Wolves, and the myth in our family was that he was Native American. So I wanted to know, who is he, right? And so that's what kicked it off. And there wasn't a whole lot of information to go from back then, because you'd have to travel to the cities to get any information. There was no ancestry.com. There
Right.
was no internet, actually. And so, but over the years, more and more information has become available. And as I began to dig, I began to see that my family line on my mother's side, on both sides of my mother's side, they both at some point were free before the Civil War. And it blew my mind. I was seeing their
Right.
names on census data, and I couldn't figure out how that could be. And then the fortune line in particular, which is the namesake of the book, the fortune line goes all the way back to 1682 and a court date in 1705 that ensnared Fortune Game McGee, the first American born ancestor that I know of on our family in our research, in the original race laws.
Hmm.
So as I began to see, whoa, my family is actually intersecting with a lot of the key points of an American history, where we are deciding how we will live together according to race. So that's what I realized. This is more than just my story. This is America's story, and this needs to be written.
Lisa, you share, and this is early on in the book when you are setting us up for the trial where Fortune is in court. I think that many people don't have any understanding of these race laws and how complicated it was. It wasn't just
Mm,
it didn't happen one, two, three that uh,
right.
Africans were considered property.
That's
And
right.
in fact, as was true of Fortune, there were so many mixed race people, because what we know is that when people come together, they create family. Doesn't matter what they look like,
Hmm.
because that is a construct that is not real. So
Hmm.
what you also describe is so many white women
Yes.
partnering with African men,
Yes.
and that is a story that is not to be told.
It is not told, and I couldn't wait to tell it. I was like, "Wait a minute. This is crazy." And it's that occurrence that actually happens in our family. And so it intersects directly with Fortune's story. So Fortune ends up in court precisely because her mother is white and her father is a Senegalese man, most likely brought over on the only ship that came to Maryland in the time between he was born and when Fortune was born, and that's the Speedwell that came over in 1686. And so at some point in that year, he met, most likely fell in love with, Maudlin McGee, who was an Ulster Scots woman and married, and they had an affair, and they named their daughter Fortune. And so Fortune ends up in court at 18 years old. She's already lived 18 years free, but somehow they haul her into court in order for her to be punished according to law that was passed after she was born, by the way. And she ends up being indentured for 31 years, not enslaved, because her mother is white. Okay. So that's the privilege of whiteness coming out in the first century of Maryland's existence, and actually also all of the colonies' existence, because the first colony was Virginia, founded in
Right.
1608, right? So you have the privilege of whiteness coming out in explicit form through this trial, and it was kind of amazing to
And
see.
so, just to let folks know who are listening, what some of these laws said,
Yeah.
because when I read these things in your book, it was new for me, and I would imagine that there are people who don't know what some of these laws were. Could you take us through that?
Absolutely. So there were several iterations of the first race laws, and I'm going to focus on Maryland, though the very first race laws happened in Virginia 2 years earlier, right? But Maryland followed suit. The second colony followed suit, and basically had their own process. One thing I discovered about this is law is never crafted in a bubble. It's never crafted just because people think, oh, this is a good way to live.
Right.
It's always crafted to solve a problem on
Yeah.
the ground, a perceived
Yeah.
problem. And the perceived problem on the ground here was white women marrying enslaved black men and having mixed race kids. And there were two problems with that. One, white women were betraying the white race, right, by marrying black men. And two, these mixed race kids were actually challenging the racial construct. They couldn't figure out, should they be free or should they be enslaved? So the planter class, which was also the legislative class, right? So that those white men who owned those plantations, they decided to do something for their benefit. They said, we're going to enslave any white woman who, if a white woman were to marry an enslaved black man and have children by that man, she herself would be enslaved by the man's master, and her children would be enslaved in perpetuity. Yes, girl. Yes. So, like, that's the thing that blew my mind is
People
white men.
look, I'm just
Yes.
saying, this is a revelation. This is
Yes.
not a piece of history that people know. I really don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. And it's right there in the law, and it's in all the papers that I've read about the law. And it was explicitly taught to me by the premier genealogist Paul Heinig, who has done his life has been given to documenting the free black people of Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, North Carolina, and South Carolina.
Yeah.
So it's right there. And get this, a couple of years later, now this is how it starts to transform so that it gets to the place where it is when Fortune is born. A couple of years later, they look up and they realize, ooh, mercy me. Planters are now forcing their white indentured women to marry enslaved black men and have children by them so that they can have free labor in perpetuity. And and including their free labor, right? So they say, oh, I'm sorry, we didn't mean to do that, which probably is not true, but it's a Catholic colony, so they clutch their pearls and they say, okay, so now instead of giving the keys to the planters to decide who gets enslaved and who gets indentured, we're going to give the keys to the church. So the church becomes the auctioning block in Maryland, and then later in Virginia and in all the colonies. They basically, everything kind of spreads. So it starts in Maryland, though. The church becomes the auctioning block, becomes the place where the image of God is crushed and where that crushing is managed. And that's a little further in, but they didn't change the law. But then there's another time where Lord Baltimore, the guy who runs Maryland, the nobleman who's like charged with running Maryland, the colony, he brings his Irish servant over to Maryland, and her name is Nell, right? So Irish Nell is what they call her, and she's like 16 years old, and she's there on a plantation of one of his friends, and she falls in love with a black man. And she says, please let me marry him. But they've already passed this law. And everybody's warning her, don't do it because then you're going to be enslaved. So
Right.
she's like, please change the law so that I can marry this man. Now, Lord Baltimore actually wanted her for himself, which is why he brought her over. But he loved her enough that he let her go. And so he changed, he pushed the legislature, the Maryland General Assembly, to change the law, but not in time for her. She had already gotten married, so she was enslaved for the rest of her life. And her children and children's children and children's children were enslaved all the way up through the Revolution, and then they were finally set free.
This is so interesting, Lisa. I'm thinking too, because you write about this in your book, but there are class differences among white folk. And
Yes.
like the Irish and the Scottish who were brought to
Yes.
the States were often brought taken out of prison, right? And
Yep.
brought here because the prisons were overflowing, and you write about that in your book.
Mhm.
But you also talk about the fact that the system that was set up for slavery was really based on the British
Yes.
wanting the whole world to serve them. So I'm
Yes.
gonna make that a cliffhanger because I know people have just joined. Let me remind you where you are. You are listening to Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole here on WBAI in New York City. That's 99.5 FM and everywhere online at WBAI.org. We are having a fascinating conversation with an author who has really devoted much of her life to researching her family history and really discovering that her history is connected to all of our histories. Her
Yeah.
book is called Fortune: How Race Broke My Family and the World. Just how race broke my family and the world. And
Mm-hmm.
thank God the second half of it is and how to repair it all. Because
Yes.
here at Dreamleapers, we don't want to just go down, down, down and get sad, sad, sad and just get stuck in sadness. And it's so easy for that to happen when we look at our history because it's really the depth of inhumanity is goes to the core of the world, to the core of culture, and it is hard to rise. When you just realize how people convinced themselves that they could own people and all the different things that occurred. But your book has it has so much history, so much documentation, and also hope. And so I appreciate that you were able to incorporate all of that. So our guest, Lisa Sharon Harper, the author of Fortune, is sharing her story with us today. Her book is just coming out right now. So we got her moments after it hit the bookstores. Uh, and Lisa, I can you talk about
Mhm.
the impact of the British Empire on our country as we know
Yes.
it today?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay, this is the reason why I'm now addicted to the show The Crown.
Oh, right.
Because you begin to understand how we have been thinking for the last centuries, really since we were set free, right? We've been thinking about this as an issue of race in America. It is not. It is
Mhm.
an issue of colonization. That's the core issue.
Yep.
It's the core issue is colonization. Wherever the British colonized the world, and not just the British, I mean, really any European power,
Mhm.
wherever they colonized the world, the first thing they did was to racialize the society, was to create a racial hierarchy of human belonging. And that they based on the Pope's edict in 1453, 1454, 1455, that was called Romanus Pontifex, that declared anywhere that an explorer of the crown goes, they can claim the land and enslave the people, right? And he based
That
that.
is so arrogant. I
Is
just
it not? And it was a bad read of the Bible, by the way. He was taking the first page of the Bible where it says that all humanity is made in the image of God, and he was saying we're the only humans,
Mhm.
right? White folk are the only humans. Other people who are not Christian are not human, and that's where he got that from. And guess where he got that from? Aristotle.
Well,
Aristotle.
okay, so you talk about this, Lisa. Okay,
Yes.
wait. Just I gotta stop for a second. You break down
You blew my mind.
Aristotle and Plato, who look, I loved philosophy when I was in college, and
Right.
you're killing me.
It
All
killed me
these
too.
people
Yeah.
using the brilliance of their minds to make the whole world think that white men are the only
Yes.
beings worthy of respect. That's
Yes.
crazy.
Yes. It is crazy. And guess what? It is the thread that threads the whole way through our colonized, the age of colonization, and all of it that came after, including January 6th, including voter suppression, including the subversion of votes that is happening right now in state houses all over the country in preparation for this November. That the edict by Aristotle that only white people, he didn't say white, of course, because they didn't think of it that way, but
Right,
Western, right? Western
right.
men who are able bodied are the only full humans. They are the ones who are full human beings and civilized. And what Aristotle said, get this, and this you can see throughout the history. He said, if if a people group is conquered, it has proven, and it's literally, I mean, a direct paraphrase, let's put it that way. In his book on politics, they have proven that they were created to be enslaved.
Mm.
So that's where Pope Nicholas got it from. He didn't get it from the Bible. He got it from Aristotle.
Oh,
And
thank Aristotle.
we've had that philosophy embedded. We had it embedded in our Constitution with the Three-Fifths Compromise. We had it embedded. It was embedded in the Southern laws once they lifted Reconstruction. And Leah Ballard, the last enslaved woman in my family, and her daughter Martha and her daughter Lizzie were living in South Carolina at that time. And in 1877, they passed a law that tried to reinstate slaveocracy. It said Black people only could do two different jobs in South Carolina. There's only two jobs they could do. They could either do field labor or they could do domestic service. That's it. They tried to reinstate slavery. And so that's what drove my great grandmother, Lizzie, to flee the South and to come north in the Great Migration. So the thing that really struck me as I was doing this research is, in many ways, the context is the text. Like the context forces our ancestors of African descent and other people of color and indigenous people to make the choices they make, right?
Right.
So the Henry's chapter is a great example of that, right? The Lawrence's chapter,
Yes.
the question of identity and how identity begins to shift and change. And those people who are born of mixed race, which Henry was, they're trying to figure out, who are we in the midst of this shifting time of identity after the Civil War? Because it's no longer a question of slave or free. So now where does the hierarchy fall? And
Mm-hmm.
so in the census, they're listed as white one year. They're listed as mulatto another year. They're listed as Black the next year, because the identity is shifting. In fact, one thing I found that didn't make it into the book just because there was too much to put in there, is that Henry's brothers, basically Henry's nephew, right? So Henry's nephew listed himself as Ethiopian at around the turn of the I swear to you, in the early 20th century. He listed himself as Ethiopian at precisely the time when Ethiopian had gained its independence. Ethiopia. So he
Ah.
was like, I am Ethiopian. So people were declaring their identity. They were saying, I determine who I am in this moment. And as a result, it doesn't really follow any real pattern. And so it's very hard to nail down who these people really were.
Well, and look, if you carry that all the way up to right now, I mean, what
Mm.
have we been called? By the way, my family is from Maryland. I'm from Baltimore. My grandmother's people are from Calvert County. That my grandmother's people, I think her mother was alive when uh, Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman were in that part of the country.
Wow.
Who
Wow.
knows if they
Yes.
knew each other or not? But my grandmother was born in 1889 and
Yes.
lived
Wow.
for 101 years.
Yes.
So,
Wow.
so when I'm just reading the Maryland part of your book, which
Mhm.
is the core, just
Mhm.
takes me to my family story as well. But what I was getting at, I remember my grandmother called herself colored, and she was, well, black people call themselves colored then,
Oh, yeah,
but
that was the thing.
yeah, that was it. She was a
Mhm.
white skinned black woman, white
Mhm.
skin, blue eyes.
Mhm.
Many people are who did not pass, although many people assumed that she was uh,
Yeah.
white. But then we were colored, we were Negro, we were black. I remember when Jesse Jackson led the campaign for African American,
Mhm.
and in part because our identity has been stripped again and again.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, one of the most profound impacts, and I think actually the core sin of slavery, is separation. It was separation from ourselves. It was separation from our land, separation from our families, not only our African families, which is bad enough, like it goes back that far. But then once we got here, we were separated again from our families. Let me tell you, part of the research in chapter 5, and this really took a lot of work because I just didn't know a whole lot at all. But now I needed to research the Weeks line of my family, which is my father's side.
Mhm.
And so his side gets one chapter, and it's a really good chapter, but it's in the Caribbean. And I was blown away by ancestry.com when they demonstrated that most likely our first African ancestor landed in the Caribbean on the weak side in 1750. I
Wow.
don't know how they figured that out, but it's the DNA. They can trace the movement of the DNA. So you can see through this movement of the DNA that it was all concentrated in Barbados. And it makes sense because Barbados was the only plantation in the Caribbean that had a Weeks plantation, hence our last name Weeks.
Okay.
Okay. And and then within one generation, within 20 years, that DNA is everywhere on every island in the Lesser Antilles. So what does that tell you? They were sold away from each other
That's right.
into every island in one generation.
Mm.
So this was this is the African American experience. This is the African diaspora experience of being separated. And then, of course, that's also true. It goes on. It's a repeating, recurring theme in our experience because it's not just the separation when you finally get to the plantation and they're now breeding enslaved people in Virginia, hello, and even in South Carolina, but also mass incarceration, peonage. They did that to us, and always for one purpose. It's never because, and needs to be a correction. It's not because they hate us. They don't hate us. They don't even know us enough to hate us.
Right.
It's because they are greedy people. they they want their own money at anybody's expense. And they had no ethical core that told them that they should not exploit others in order to make for themselves. In fact, their entire history had told them the opposite, had told them the way the world works is you dominate in order to survive. That's the way things worked in Europe. And so they carried that over here, and that's what they did. Now, you can make an argument now that it has turned into hate. Hello, January 6th and other, white nationalists
Sure.
now. But it's always been about money. Always.
And it remains. I mean, look, that is something that you talk about in your book about the loss of generational wealth,
Yes,
because in order for our country to be built, the way that it was built was on the backs of people who did not get paid
that is
for their
right.
labor. I mean,
That is
it's
right.
incredible. Let me remind folks, you are listening to Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole here on WBAI in New York City. That's 99.5 FM and everywhere online at WBAI.org. And we are talking to an incredible author. Her name is Lisa Sharon Harper, and her book is called Fortune: How Race Broke My Family and the World and How to Repair It All. There's so much history in this book. I really hope that it ends up being a book that is taught in schools, because
Mm.
you can spend weeks and months unpacking just each chapter. It's dense with history,
Mm.
and I
Mm.
think that it's a lot of the history is something that we don't all know. And so
Mhm.
I'm going to ask my listeners, would you like to have a copy of this book? I recommend it highly. Lisa has donated books to us in that beautiful way that we ask authors to do, so that we can have a gift that we can give you in exchange for your donation to our beloved radio station. As you know,
Mhm.
we have no commercials. We have you. We have the covenant of the community and folks giving generously, and on wonderful occasions like today, we have a gift that we can give you. So Lisa's book, Fortune: How Race Broke My Family and the World and How to Repair It All, can be yours if you make a $50 contribution to WBAI. That $50 is going to help us keep the lights on. It's going to help us pay those bills. And, we all have them. And you will get this beautiful book. I tell you, it's a book that you can turn the TV off, read, and talk about it with your family. If you have children, I so strongly recommend that you get this book, because you can have a conversation with them about our history that will be so incredibly eye-opening. And there are facts in the book. What bothers me sometimes is people talk about history, but they don't know what they're talking about. And
Mm.
they're not using facts, right, Lisa? That's terrible.
Yes, that's common. Mhm.
It's common. And so this is a very, very well-researched book that has footnotes. You can go to the source if you want to read more. That's the kind of book that I think is helpful for children. And when I
Mm.
say children and families, I'm not just talking about Black families. Everybody who is listening, I'm talking to you. And I know
Mm.
that my audience is diverse. This is our history,
Mm.
even though
Yes.
it is the storytelling of Lisa Sharon Harper, who is African American. So if you'd like a copy of this book, please make a $50 contribution. Our number is 212 209 2950. I'll say it again, 212 209 2950. And you can also go to give to the numeral 2 WBAI.org to make your donation. So I appreciate all of you for being part of the family, and please give generously. So, Lisa, you talk about, now I'm going to the end of the book for something
Okay.
that I think is just really important. You talk about forgiveness,
Mm.
and and
Mm.
there's a lot of conflict around forgiveness
Oh,
when you
yes.
know the kinds of things that have been perpetrated against folk,
Yes.
and to the extent that wealth was stolen, lives were stolen, backs were broken, and you talk about the need to forgive.
Yeah.
Can you explain why you feel it's important to forgive, and how to do that?
Hmm. I mean, I just want to say, first of all, I I said BIA earlier, and it should be BAI,
Yes, yes,
WBAI. And so I just want to say I'm correcting the record there. Um, but then also the reason why forgiveness is necessary, it's because the end of the story is not simply us getting what we want, is
yes.
not simply getting what, not even what we want, what we deserve, not even just getting justice. If that's the end of the story, it actually won't be the end. It'll go into a cycle of domination. It will not result in the beloved community. The
Mm,
beloved community that Dr. King talked about and cast the vision for the world. It's like a civil vision for the world, a civic vision for the world. Uh, what it looks like for everyone to flourish. We won't get to everyone flourishing if it's just about reparation. And it
mm.
is important to understand that forgiveness comes after reparations in the book.
Uh-huh.
It
That's
does
true.
not come first, it comes after. So there is a call for reparations in the book and truth telling. The last chapter is on forgiveness because I had originally conceived the chapters to be truth telling, reparation, restitution. And I really sat down and thought about that. And I thought, okay, so where's that going to lead?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't lead to beloved community necessarily. There needs to be something to deal with the trauma inside of our own souls. There needs to be something to deal with the reality that there are some things that cannot be repaired.
Mm-hmm.
There are some things that can never be restored. There are some payments that white folk just don't have the money to ante up. They just don't have it. It's like demanding a check when somebody only got $5 in the bank. You can get $5, but you're not going to get all that you owe, right?
Right,
So that
right.
means if you keep demanding that check for $100 from the person who only has $5, then you are the one who ends up in 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 knots and becoming rotted by that unmet need.
Mm-hmm.
But if you forgive, forgiveness is to cut the tie between you and the oppressor, to say, I don't need you. You can
Mm-hmm.
go your way. I don't need you anymore. I release you.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, God, and I am a person of faith, and so this is obviously written from the perspective of a person of faith. And forgiveness is a fundamentally Christian concept, right?
Yes,
So
it is. Mm-hmm.
so in that Christian conception of the world, I then turn to God, who owns that cattle in 1,000 hills and who delights in giving me what I need. And I say, God, it is now time for you to ante up. You move that mountain, God, and you fill the need because the need is still here and God will move it. I no longer need white people to do anything. I got God. It's kind of the reason why I actually think that there's no Archbishop Desmond Tutu put it perfectly. There is no future without forgiveness.
Mhm.
There's another book that is written by Donald Shriver, who used to be the president of Union Theological Seminary, and he said that we need to have an ethic for enemies, and he talks about forgiveness as that ethic because we are still going to be living in the same society together. We have been traumatized and re-traumatized, and the layers of trauma are thick, and we haven't been able to get out from under the last one before a next one comes.
Mhm.
So if we don't do our work to heal our bodies and our minds and our souls, then yes, we'll get our check. Yes, we might even get a new education system. Yes, we might even get a new healthcare system and all of the things that reparation would require. But we ourselves will not be well. And so, what does beloved community require? It requires that we be well. So, forgiveness is a part of that equation, not the only part, but a part of it.
Yeah. So, Lisa, I want to dig a little deeper in that for a moment because you described how early on the church became the
Yes.
conduit for slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that we've had such a conflicted relationship with the church
Yeah, that's good.
over all of these generations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the church has been essential in marching toward freedom. The
Yes.
church has been essential in holding people back.
Yes. Yes.
And so
Mm-hmm.
as a woman of faith, as
Mm-hmm.
someone who has done all of this research,
Mm-hmm.
how do you reconcile, how do you trust,
Yeah.
and how do you know that what you believe is real
Yeah.
given all of the mess and politics and history of that really creates confusion around the church?
Oh, can we talk here? Oh my gosh, this is a great question. This is at the core. Jesus was not white. Jesus was not European. Jesus was a brown, colonized man from a serially enslaved people. Every single book, every word written in the entire Bible was written by a brown, colonized person, except in the case of two, David and Solomon, who were kings. But they were kings of a dinky little kingdom that kept getting sacked by empire. They were not kings of an empire. They were not emperors. And so Jesus, the entire New Testament takes place in the context of a colonized people. The entire Old Testament, Moses, or most of the Old Testament, well, no, the entire Old Testament takes place in the context of either a colonized or um, being colonized or trying not to be colonized people and serially enslaved. So the problem is not with the text, is not with this, with Jesus. The problem is the fact that since Constantine, this text has been interpreted and declared orthodox within the halls of white empire. That the Jesus got colonized by the church, by the white church, and that's important because it's interesting that when black folk come to this text in the late 1700s, black folk actually see themselves in brown Jesus.
Mm.
Black folks see themselves in brown Moses and Zipporah, black Zipporah. Black folks see themselves in the multiple stories of crossing over that are in that text. The whole Bible, all it really is, when you really boil it down, it is like 50 some odd books of brown authors trying to figure out how to make it in a world where they kept getting conquered. That's what that book is about. It is about how do we make it in the world, in this world where we keep getting conquered. And what is our relationship with God anyway? And what does God think about us? And on the first page, they make that clear.
Right.
It is it is a revolutionary act for the writers of Genesis 1, there's like four different sets of writers that write the book of Genesis. And the very first page of the Bible is written by this company of priests who are exiting the Babylonian exile, by the way, where they were enslaved for 70 years. And they declare on that first page that all humanity is made in the image of God.
Mm-hmm.
All, and as such, is called to exercise dominion in the world. Do you realize that's a direct affront to the worldview of their oppressors that told them they were created to be enslaved? So they were basically critiquing the worldview of their oppressors on their way out as they were about to leave. And so that's who our Jesus is. That's who brown Jesus is. It is power to us. Brown Jesus sparked the second great awakening, which was the spark that lit the abolitionist movement. We
Mm-hmm.
are free today because of brown faith, because of black faith, because we, people of African descent, connected to brown Jesus, who was politically black in his era, in his space, and who was oppressed by an explicitly white supremacist European empire, Rome.
Boom. Oh my gosh.
I'm
You
just
broke
saying.
that down, and I appreciate it because, you know, we know that during slavery, the African enslaved people were not allowed to read. It was against
Right.
the law. You could
Yes.
be killed. Why? Because if you were able to read, then you would be able to recognize that what was being said to you wasn't true. But then it's
Yes.
amazing, Lisa, that like how it's kind of like everybody got together and decided we're going to make artwork that makes Jesus white. We're going to
Yes.
cut off the noses of all these sculptures, by the way, that
Yes.
we stole from
Yes.
all over the world.
Oh my
And
God.
I mean, it's
Yes.
mind-bogglingly arrogance. That is the part that is just beyond comprehension. And you described it that legally folks, I mean, going back to Columbus, like Columbus came here and discovered America. What do you mean? There were people living here for thousands of years
And
before.
yeah.
before
And
how
Columbus, by
is
the way,
that
never
true?
set foot here. I just want to make that clear.
Right, right. Say that again.
Columbus never actually set foot in North America ever. He never, ever,
It was the
ever, his feet
Caribbean,
never
correct?
landed here. He was in the Caribbean and in
Right.
South America. And yeah, and there were 100 million indigenous people on the land when he got here.
You can't make this up. That's
You
you,
can't.
you just can't make it up. Let me remind folks, we
Mhm.
are talking to Lisa Sharon Harper. She knows her stuff, y'all. I mean, the history lesson is real that we are getting right now. She has written a book called Fortune: How Race Broke My Family and the World, and How to Repair It All. She spent 30 years doing research way before there was Ancestry.com. I remember when my family started, probably a lot of our family started doing the family tree. And when you go to family reunions, everybody's bringing
Right.
stories of, did you know about this one? Did you know about that one? And unfortunately, even though we have an easier path to get a lot of this information, many people are still not doing the research and not talking to their elders. And look, we have to ask our elders questions while they are here. That
Yes.
sense of the griot, who's a griot in your family? Talk to them so you can learn everything that you can,
Mhm.
before they leave us. But Lisa went many steps further and did a tremendous amount of research, which gives us a lot of context for why we are where we are today,
Mhm.
how we got here, what some of the sinister things are that people thought up in order to create wealth for themselves. It certainly is a an expose of selfishness that we
Mhm.
see in this book. And you can have a copy of this book, Fortune: How Race Broke My Family and the World, and How to Repair It All, by calling WBAI and making a donation of $50. You can get the gift of this book. Our number is 212-209-2950. Again, 212-209-2950. Just ask for Fortune and make your $50 donation, and it will be yours. We thank Lisa for doing all this work so that we can have a book like this. And as I mentioned before, it's reading it with your family. It's creating a book club if you aren't part of one already. And why I'm saying
Mhm.
that is there's so much to digest and to think about. And I think it helps to talk about it.
Mhm.
I feel like this is a book that you don't just read on your own, but you share what's in it, and the way of digesting it is communicating with other people. So
Mm.
get your copy now for $50, 212-209-2950, or you can write go online, give to WBAI.org. Lisa,
Hmm.
the you mentioned, and it is true, I skipped around in the book. You mentioned that reparations come first. And
Yes.
I just, I remember Randall Robinson, who created TransAfrica so many years ago. He was waving the flag of reparations for years, and ultimately he and his wife Hazel left the country. He's like, this isn't going to work. I'm done with you all.
Wow.
I mean,
Yeah.
he just like he was just so upset.
Hmm.
When reparations is a bad word, people think of it like a four-letter word. No, I'm not. We're not giving you money.
Mhm.
And furthermore, I didn't do that. That I don't know who you're talking about, but I
Right.
didn't do that.
Yeah.
I'm not racist. I didn't do any of this stuff.
Mhm.
What does reparations mean to you, and what are you suggesting that people should be asking for?
Reparations is simply repair. It is simply the act of repairing what race, this construct of human hierarchy of belonging, broke in our world. There's no way for us to get anywhere but to January 6th and wherever that takes us without repairing the deep grave. It's not even a ditch, it's a grave, it's a death trap that we built for ourselves as a nation. You cannot have a democracy without having equality, without having equal access to flourishing. And throughout the history of this nation, stemming all the way back to 1619 and going forward, there has been a constant thread, a drumbeat of war, the war that white men have waged to hoard power and wealth. That has been the war that they have waged, and they have passed policies and every generation in order to do that. They pushed back against abolition and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment by putting that little loophole in the 13th Amendment and then taking advantage of it with peonage to get their money, right? So at one point in the late 1800s, I think it was 1890s, Alabama had like 85% of its GDP coming from peonage, from
Tell us
black
what peonage is, in case folks don't know.
peonage was that practice. There's two really beautiful books and powerful books, actually not beautiful, they're horrific, but powerful books about peonage, Worse Than Slavery and Slavery by Another Name. So I recommend them both, right? So this was the practice that happened. It was one of the Jim Crow laws that lowered the bar of criminality, so that they could swap black folk off the street and put them in jail, but the jail was the plantation that black person had just been set free from. Literally. So they were literally put back on the plantation to work for free for the state at that point. Like, so the state would lease people. It became convict leasing, which is still practiced to this day, by the way. Hello.
Yeah.
Um, yes, in order to get cheap labor. So years ago, Victoria's Secret used convict leasing in order to sew their clothes. What how back in the back with Bugs Bunny and like Roadrunner and stuff, you would see Acme this, and you'd see the desks and office furniture. Office furniture used to be built by, and actually I think is still built by convict leased prisoners today to make it cheap. Hello. So, and this all is able to happen because of that loophole in the 13th Amendment. So they got around true democracy by putting that loophole in. And peonage was one of the ways that they did that.
And
After
this
the
and this,
civil
by the
rights.
way, Lisa, didn't this occur right after slavery ended? Is
Mhm.
when what we now call the prison industrial complex that began.
Yes.
So there
Mhm.
has to be another way to keep these people under our control.
Yes.
And well, of course, sharecropping, because where are you going to go if you've never had any money? Now where are you going to go?
Yes. Yes.
So all of it, and it's hard for people to understand. There are many people who just simply do not understand
Mhm.
that the what the prisons look like today and who inhabits most prisons is reflective of slavery, like directly reflected. And
Directly.
it's hard for people to understand that, but if you look at the history, it's obvious.
Yeah, I mean, even if you go to many prisons in the South, especially, what you find is, I don't know if you hear my dog. Do you hear my
That's
dog?
all right. It's okay.
We must have gotten somebody rang the doorbell. So there you go. um, so the the prisons are. I'm sorry. Should we hold for a minute?
No, no, keep going.
No?
Keep
Okay,
going.
okay, sorry. So the prisons in America now reflect the Jim Crow peonage, which reflected the plantations. So it is literally one straight through line all the way through in order to bilk Black bodies of our labor and exploit it for cheap, low, and no cost labor. That's and the goal. And how do we do that? Why do they do that? They do that because that has always been the way that the noble European classes, right? So the ones who quote noble, the ones who were granted land, the way that they made their profit was through cheap and no cost labor. That was indentured servitude, which
Yep.
morphed into slavery and such. We need to find another way of being together in the world. And can I say this to your white listeners? I want to say this,
Please.
that y'all lost out too. That as deep as the break happened in our families because of the weight of the oppression and the layered nature of the oppression over centuries, guess what? You lost out too. Because when your ancestors came to this land, they had to renounce their connection to their own stories, to the stories in Lithuania and Germany and Ireland and Italy, in order to become white. And
Mm,
why wouldn't they want to become white? Whiteness was declared as the one thing that actually gave you the ability to exercise dominion on this land. Whiteness was declared the true human, right? So who wouldn't want to be truly human? So people of European descent fought their way all the way to the Supreme Court through the 1920s in order to prove that they were white. And the
mm.
Supreme Court then had to make a decision about whether they were white or not. Some of the last cases were people from Pakistan and people from India, I'm sorry, Japan, who argued that they were white. And they were like, well, yeah, you might be from the Caucasus, but that's not what we really mean. So no, you go back down where you belong, those people of color, right? So this is what people were struggling by law to be declared white because whiteness meant human. And here's the thing, it actually dehumanizes because it disconnects. It
Right.
disconnects you from your actual land, your actual story. Most white people I know tell me, "Oh, I'm just a European mutt. I'm just white." You
Yes,
are
I hear
not,
that a lot.
right? You are not. You actually also have a story. And usually your story is that you got here because of one of three things. One, either you were of that quote noble class that got granted land and you are still in that noble class that now is granted jobs in the Fortune 500 count companies, right? That's you. Or you came here escaping oppression or poverty. When you begin to do your own family research and you ask the questions, how did we get here? What is the story of the people who were left back home? Why did we come? What were we escaping? How did we get here? That will be a rehumanizing act for you.
Mm. One quick question. We only have a couple of minutes left.
Mhm.
I I talk to many white Americans, some who can trace their family back to plantation owning it. Obviously, you'd have to. There were a lot of them
Mhm.
who wrestle with, what do I do with this? I don't want to be that person who's, benefiting when so many people are not. What advice do you give to folk who have benefited and are aware of it and have a sense of
That's
guilt
good.
about it?
That's good. And they should. Not shame, because shame says you are the worst thing you've ever done or your
Mhm.
ancestors. That's shame is crippling. Shame is paralyzing. Tell shame to go to hell, basically. But guilt is real. Guilt means there's actual wrong done and it
Mhm.
needs to be corrected. It needs to be repaired. So what do? First of all, you seek the truth. You literally go on a search and you interrogate the stories that you've been told. And you do that family tree, but not only to see how far back you can go, but to ask the question, where were your ancestors when this was happening? What was their response to Emmett Till? Did they benefit from the slaveocracy? Or were they also one of those people who were actually indentured? And what was their response to being indentured? For example, George McGee, the man who was married to Maudlin McGee, who was the mother of Fortune. George McGee and his family moved south after a while. They moved deep south, and they become among the most prolific slaveholders in the country. They came from Scotch Irish people who were not Scotch Irish, Ulster Scott people who were planting plantations for the English in Scotland. Hello. So, what is your history? Where do you come from? And then you have to ask the question, how do I make things right? And you don't get to decide that. You have to go to the people who were harmed and you have to ask them, what do you say needs
Mm,
to happen in order for things to be made well with you? And then
excellent.
do it. That's how the relationship is repaired. And that's the most important thing.
Wow. Hey guys, this hour has flown by. We have been talking with Lisa Sharon Harper, the author of the book that has just come out, Fortune: How Race Broke My Family and the World and How to Repair It All. Please call WBAI right now, 212-209-2950. Make a $50 contribution, and Lisa is offering this gift to you. I highly recommend it. Lisa, congratulations on putting all of this work into this incredible book. It's just a history treasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Harriet. It's really been a pleasure and an honor to be talking with you. Thank you.
All right, you guys, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being together with me. Until next time, have a great day and make it count.